Welcome to Elixir Mix, your weekly Elixir podcast talking with members of the community. My name is Mark Ericksen, and today I'm joined by Josh Adams.
Present.
And we have a special guest today who is Eric Oestrich.
Hello.
Eric, you've been here before. We're glad to have you back. Could you just, in case people have kind of missed our previous talk and discussion with you, could you give a little introduction to yourself and just kind of what you're doing?
Sure. So I work at SmartLogic. We do web and mobile development. And I also have a side project called ExVenture and a different one called Grapevine. They're both open source Elixir applications centered around text-based games.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Well, that is cool. Yeah, because we've had you on before. You and I, we met at ElixirConf, and you were presenting there. And we had some really great discussions just at a table. And I was like, oh, man, we've got to have you on. And you shared some interesting insights with me on things like using Prometheus for instrumenting our applications. So part of this is we want to just get an update with where things are with ExVenture, and also just talk about some of the topics around that and all the things that you've been doing and learning.
Yeah. So for better or worse, ExVenture hasn't progressed terribly far. I've done a lot of refactors, learning what a bad Elixir app looks like and making it look like a good Elixir app. So not too terribly much new features. The other reason would be that the other project called Grapevine has sucked up all of my time, which was and now is so it's a chat network for text-based games. So they connect to a WebSocket, and then it's more or less Phoenix channels, but without the Phoenix channels part. So that some random Python server doesn't have to deal with Phoenix channels. But so there's that, and now it's turning into more of a game listing website. And the most recent addition is a web client that lets you connect to Telnet-based games.
Woo!
We're bringing it old school.
So I do think it's worth mentioning just for any of those in our audience who haven't heard about ExVenture before. So this is one of the things that impressed me about it is it's a fairly large, like non-trivial open source application that happens to be so it's web-based. It's using Phoenix, it's using channels, but it's a text-based game. And I thought that was super cool at the time, just because it's like, wow, like that is like very retro, and but you were just kind of having fun playing with it and saying like, what can I do? How can I build this? And so I just want to mention to people like what ExVenture is, and that it is worth being aware of, because it has benefited both Josh and myself as a reference for using different ideas and just kind of looking at like when I met you at the conference, you were talking about Prometheus and using getting that data and representing it in Grafana and like kind of instrumenting an app.
Yep.
And I was really impressed with that. And like, yeah, you just got to use Prometheus EX. There's this library, and it's like, so Josh, you said you recently did something around Prometheus, right?
Not supremely recently, but yeah, when I was doing some Prometheus stuff for a project for a customer, I had not done Prometheus and Elixir before, and I happened to remember that ExVenture had. And so I dug through the code base and found all the various Prometheus libraries for Elixir and wired stuff up, and it went pretty swimmingly. It was like 2 hours, and I had stuff reporting.
That is really cool. So I think it's just probably worth mentioning just what Prometheus is. Prometheus is it's a Go application that can be set up to poll your application or other services and pull them for statistics and information. And then like a service like Grafana can talk to Prometheus and visualize all of the stats and information that's coming out of there.
Yeah, I guess one important thing to reiterate is it's poll-based instead of like StatsD, which is push-based. So if your application can't be talked to from Prometheus, all it does is lose, forgot the word, granularity, or something like that. So it just loses the granularity of how often it polls. So like you still get metrics, and if a hiccup happens, like it'll catch it later. So yeah,
that's cool. So so with ExVenture, you recently had a blog post where you're just kind of giving a product update or project update, and so why don't you tell us again, like a little bit more about Gossip and Grapevine and how you're using those and what kind of where they fit in and why, like, you know, where other people might be interested in using those.
Yeah. So you're probably not about to integrate this into anything you do day to day, but they're also there and available as they're all of these things are MIT licensed. So they're kind of exist to be applications to go and see what someone else is doing. So Gossip and Grapevine used to be two separate applications. The split was fairly confusing for people in the text-based community. So then I merged them all into just be Grapevine. So now it's less weird as well. But there's the reason that you would want to use that with ExVenture is you can sign in to ExVenture with Grapevine. So Grapevine has its own OAuth provider. I wasn't able to use an existing one out there because of some funky things with my data, namely that I reuse some client ID stuff from a different table than the one I found uses. But so you can click a sign in with Grapevine button on your ExVenture after giving it your client ID and secret, and then goes off to Grapevine, says, do you want to authorize? Yes, no. If you click yes, goes back, and then you're signed in. So that's the primary reason. I'm starting to get closer to things like achievements so that you can register your character on a remote game, and then the game will manage achievements. And whenever you unlock something, it'll go tell Grapevine that you unlocked it, so you can have a centralized profile, increase your wonderful Grapevine score, whatever it ends up being called, gamify everything, right?
Nice. Yeah. And I know you've also been involved with doing CI, setting up some of that. I'm curious, like, you're not, like, what does your backend infrastructure kind of look like for this? Like, if someone is coming to Elixir and they're saying, hey, you know, I'd like to set up a CI server, what solution did you choose to go with?
So I went with Travis CI, primarily because it's free for open source, and I happen to have an open source project.
Nice.
So ExVenture and Grapevine both run through Travis. You can look at, there's a .travis.yaml, I think is what it is, in the root repo. And so you can see all the steps that it does to set up. It installs deps, installs hex, etc., and then does like mix test, mix credo. And then I also started generating a full release and pushing it out to S3 when it's done on the master branch. So that way, hopefully it's easier to eventually have someone just download that release, place it somewhere, and have an ExVenture server booted. That's like set up for production. Grapevine also now runs the 16 JavaScript tests I have. think that's the current number.
I have never. I've always been like wanting to do JavaScript tests, and it's like just like so tedious. It's like painful. It's like unless it's just pure business logic.
Yeah, all this does is test reducers. So,
and that's all I've really found the best way to what I really want to test.
Yep. Yeah, I figured that the reducers were a pretty good. So Grapevine has the web client is in Redux and React, which is my first time giving that a go. So that uses, those test the reducer functions, since that, at least hopefully the view is straight. Sorry?
Pure?
Yeah. Hopefully the views are pure, right? So that it just changes based on what the data is. So if I test the reducers, then hopefully I don't have to test the front end. So we'll see.
Well, testing the front end has never been hard, has it?
You could say that, I guess.
Oh man, I hope you're just trolling.
Oh, yeah. It's the worst thing ever.
So Eric, one of the questions I wanted to ask was about how easy or difficult do you feel it was getting an Elixir project set up with a CI server?
So it was, I previously had ExVenture running on Travis, so I had a bit of a head start with that. But I think it took 11 commits and like 4 hours, which in the grand scheme of CI is really not that bad.
Do you remember what the pain points were?
A lot of it was just booting Postgres 10 and figuring out exactly what Travis needed to not run Postgres 9. So if you're better able to control what that version is, I think it cut it down significantly. I actually think Grapevine itself worked in one commit, which is like unheard of, I think. Mostly that was me copy pasting exactly what I had already done. So I had a bit of a head start there.
Yeah, I've set up Elixir CI stuff quite a bit with different providers, and yes, absolutely, I go and copy paste the previous thing rather than go from first principles again. I thought I'd mention, because I like these guys a lot. The folks at Semaphore have just launched a new CI product that's rather neat that we're using for some fun stuff, and it has pipelines. I'm sure Travis has had pipelines for a year or so as well, but for sort of kicking off future tasks either via a click in the UI or based on, hey, was this a commit to master, etc. I only wanted to mention something other than Travis because I don't know if you'd seen, but Travis, like this week, laid off a lot of really talented developers.
Yeah, we use Jenkins at work.
That's its own nightmare, although I love it. I'm excited about Jenkins. Jenkins has like a sort of cloud native Jenkins they're working on that uses Jenkins X, or is Jenkins X, I forget. But really excited for the chance to test that out, because I do like Jenkins a whole lot, and I like the idea of hosting my own, as long as I don't have to host my own the way I historically have hosted Jenkins. Yeah,
we have also, I think, worked with Circle CI, or no. GitLab has their own runners that you can run. You can run locally, but they manage like actual kickoff of the test run. So one of our projects uses that, and I think there's another one out there that has a similar runner.
I really like the way that GitLab does it.
Yeah, it's on my short list of things to do for DevOps is setting up a locally, an internal GitLab server so we can do our own CI and CD that way.
Yeah, not Elixir related at all, but Semaphore has, in beta now, they have a Mac OS build machine that you can use, which is super duper useful if you want to say, I don't know, do continuous delivery of test builds of a Flutter app.
What would you know about that? I mean,
I know that it was really painful to set up initially, but now it's just on autopilot.
And that was using what tool?
Semaphore. And their beta, I don't even know that they've announced it yet, so oops. But they have an OS 10 machine coming.
I know I've worked in environments where we had mobile apps, and they had internal internally done. I'm not sure I wasn't aware of what exact system it was that they were using, but they were doing it like on what are those little Apple devices? The Mac Mini, yeah. They had like an internal like Mac Mini using for builds. Like
that is the standard default CI machine for OS 10. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
You mean they're not using the garbage can?
That would be a waste of GPU. Well, I think it's great that you've made the effort even to set up like testing and CI on an open source project, like one that's, obviously some open source projects, we really need that. But like you could argue that, this is just a hobby. This is just for fun. But I know you've also been using your project ExVenture as a playground for testing features that were something or approaches that you wanted to use perhaps internally at your company. Can you just kind of talk briefly about that?
Yeah, so that was primarily where, especially early on, ExVenture was a lot of kind of where I pushed to was like, I've heard of ETS. What is that? Let's figure out how to use that. It's kind of stuff like that. And it actually started out like, I don't remember if I told the story last time, but I accidentally stumbled into writing a MUD because I wanted to figure out how Rancher worked, which is the Cowboys TCP acceptor. So I started it's called a protocol. So I started a Ranch protocol and like had an Echo server up, and then it was a chat server. And I was like, hey, I've always wanted to write a MUD. And a year and a half later, here I am.
That's great. Yeah, that's the hazards of playing around, right? Like,
yep.
I wonder if I can make it do this. Yep.
Yeah, and then our us playing around with Prometheus actually was started through. I had like a day or two for professional development at work, kind of in between projects, and it's like, we know that we need to move off of New Relic because they're killing their free version. So like, let's see what else is out there. And like, we've heard of Prometheus, so let's like go do that in like an Elixir project, Eric. So that's how that whole thing got started. Was just like trying new things out and seeing how it fits into an existing real world application.
Mm-hmm. I do think there's value in that, of just having side projects, just if for nothing else than to explore and work with, trying out new technology
without stress.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because there's not necessarily any deadline, and it's like, can I make this work? And what does that feel like as a developer? Like, what's the experience like, and do I like it?
Yeah. I was joking about with my coworkers, is like, I was looking at my analytics one day and saw someone, like 2 people were on the website. I was like, help, what do? I have users. This is a side project.
That's awesome.
Raise venture capital.
Yeah. I can't imagine there's too much ready to head into text-based gaming, but maybe it's out there.
I don't know. You could, integrate with like an AR, like augmented reality HoloLens, kind of like people walking around, seeing little text going up along the screen.
That's true. People have whether they were joking or not, talked about MUDs in VR. But I think it's more, you put the VR on and you're sitting in front of a computer.
One of the favorite things that I did when I was, I don't know, like, that's probably 8 years ago. There was a guy I knew from the open source world that was pretty young. He was not out of high school yet, and he'd been begging anyone to give him any kind of project to work on in Ruby. And so I paid him to write a graphical layer that just interpreted the Ruby Hero game and produced like a GUI for it, just with some openly available tile sets. And that was really fun. And I thought that would be a fun thing to pursue at some point on top of something like ExVenture, but I didn't think it enough to actually do it.
Yeah, there's I know there's at least one existing project that is set up so that the way they define the data, it's set up so that it's like in the world in 3D, but it gets spit out as text, so that eventually when he writes the the client that can read that data. Like you can put on your headset and like see the cup sitting on the desk, like where it's supposed to be. So yeah, it's definitely doable.
That sounds like the Dwarf Fortress approach to a text-based game.
Yeah. I think last time I mentioned the Elixir Lang server, and that led us to Aldrich, and he's doing specifically Dwarf Fortress in Elixir. That's multiplayer, so called Dwarlixir.
So you'd mentioned that even at work you had like these like free time that was kind of like set up to say that you could experiment with things, or like, hey, could you try this technique, using this technology in your project. So let's just mention again that you work for SmartLogic, and you guys are doing some interesting new stuff now. And I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about what you're doing there. Like one in particular is that you're doing live coding on Twitch.
Yeah, so we started at the beginning of January. Every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern, I do an hour of streaming on either ExVenture or Grapevine. So it's all open source stuff, so there's no worrying about showing secret code that I'm not supposed to. So I pick a thing that I want to do that time. So this week's in particular was setting up TLS connections for games so that it's not through plain text, which is what Telnet is. So there's at least a secure wrapper around that Telnet. So I went through sort of figuring out how the SSL Erlang application works and how to connect to it, and how it's pretty similar to GenTCP, but just sends different messages. The one before that, I think I did a bit with clustering. So I peeled essentially a supervision tree out into its own Erlang application and then Erlang node. And you can watch me only take 30 minutes to do that. So yeah, go Erlang. So it's every Monday at 12 Eastern. It's at twitch.tv/SmartLogicTV. I think there'll be a link somewhere. But yeah, follow that, and I think it sends out notifications when I go live.
Nice. So what are some of have you like learned any kind of lessons just going through the process of live coding? Because it's like I know when I sit down at a computer and do pair programming, and there's someone watching me type, my typing skills go demonstrably worse. So I don't know, what's it been like for you?
I haven't had that happen. I don't know if it's the first few streams obviously had like one or two people watching, and it's like started to have an uptake. But I definitely also have, if I like see the person or like specifically know the person who I'm talking to watching me type, my typing also degrades. But for some reason that hasn't happened with this. So I guess since it's just anonymous people that I don't even know who they are watching, maybe that helps.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Triplebyte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume. You spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, Triplebyte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. Triplebyte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/elixir. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through Triplebyte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
So are you able to take any are you getting like feedback where people can ask questions? How interactive is that? Like if I were wanted to watch someone do some Elixir coding, I'm kind of newer to Elixir, so I could kind of watch the thought process and how you do it. Would I be able to ask you questions?
Yeah. So last week, for the remainder 30 minutes, I think that was the same one. But for the last one, I kind of went through. There were 2 new people to Elixir in the chat, and they were talking. And so I just kind of walked through like what a supervision tree was and like how that works, and like showed a process crashing and how it was self-contained and like didn't touch anything else in the system. So yeah, I definitely, if you pop in and have a specific question and want to see it guided elsewhere, then yeah, definitely can do that.
I was going to mention, since we're talking about the live coding, I pasted a link that should show up in the show notes. That is Suze Hinton, I think is her name. It's lessons from my first year of live coding on Twitch, and it goes through her whole setup, and it's really, really nice. It's just good in general for, hey, you want to do a Twitch stream. Here's some really good tools and how you can use them.
If only I had found this 2 months ago.
It was there for the finding, but I only found it a couple days ago.
Yeah, I use OBS to grab a single desktop, which surprisingly works well in Linux.
I know, OBS is awesome. And you can do like the picture-in-picture kind of like window of yourself up there and overlay it all real time.
Yep. Yeah. So I have myself in the corner so that you can at least see that someone is there.
That's me in the corner.
Yeah, I'll just put drop a link to that in the show notes, but that's obsproject.com. It's a great tool. It's cross-platform.
Oh, so I had a question about your update for ExVenture. You mentioned that you created a Docker release, and in the blog post you say that you pushed this Docker release up to S3. I didn't see in the Travis where that happened.
Yeah. So in the Travis, I think that is specifically set up to through my config outside of that YAML file. It does the archive publishing. But if you look at the release.sh script, so it builds the release inside of Docker and then starts a container that just runs true, copies the release out of it into the temp folder, and then kills the container. So that's how it. So the release exventure.tar.gz is sitting inside of the temp folder, and Travis knows that is a thing it should publish to S3, and so that's how that works.
So I was curious, have you thought about pushing it to Docker Hub or somewhere more, I guess, Docker friendly?
So I'm not actually running the Docker container, I guess, as ExVenture. That is also a thing that sort of exists through more development only at the moment, but I'm just using Docker to build the release and then pull the release out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. So that way it's at least a common Debian stretch, I think is what it ends up being. Because I had originally been just this .release script used to just run mix release production or whatever. And then I was building it on an Arch machine. Everything was happy pushing to an Ubuntu 18.04 until Arch updated to OpenSSL 1.3 or something. And everything broke. So this way it's at least more consistent and should work on any kind of Debian Ubuntu system that's up to date, is the hope.
I will say, so I use Arch Linux as my laptop and desktop. It's like, it's what I enjoy using.
Nice.
But I have run into the issue before where Arch updates things like the version of Postgres. And now my app that I'm working on is broken until I migrate to the new version of Postgres.
Yeah, you can peg Postgres, or you can just say, hey, don't update that, Arch.
Yeah. So one of the things I found, I just want to mention this as an idea for anyone, because it doesn't have to be because you're running on like a bleeding edge Linux distribution, but it's just, I will often run my databases out of Docker instances, where I'll just have my Docker running Postgres. I might have a Docker running MySQL, because then I can easily start and stop them. and they stay on whatever version I want them to be on. It's just, I don't know. I like it because it gives me more explicit control, especially around versioning.
Yeah, it's also super. I don't do that, but I have some occasions where it would be nice to do that because, for instance, the Google Cloud SQL Postgres instance runs Postgres 9.6, and none of my machines run Postgres 9.6, which generally is kind of okay until I try to do something involving a database dump and import, and then stuff goes horribly wrong because they changed things because it's a major version.
Right. Yeah, and you might not be you might be using a feature that you're not aware is not available in an older release. Yep.
Yeah, we had one system that was stuck on Elasticsearch 2.4, and they're on like 6 now. So the only way to actually use it was through Docker. So yeah, definitely recommend that approach.
The thing I like about Arch is it forces me to keep everything updated because everything's just master all the time.
Yes. I love it. I keep everything's up to date. Like I've had more reliable, long, like years of running system over an Ubuntu system, like an LTS even. It's like, I don't know why, but it's like Arch just seems to, now it's not always been true. I have had issues, but anyway.
Yeah. I think I've had 3, maybe 4, like, this won't boot in like 6 years.
Yeah, but those are just fun mornings.
True. I also had like 12 of them in like 2 months running Ubuntu on the same like hardware. So there we go.
But before I have to feel people telling me that you should just use OS 10 because it just works with the capital letters, I should mention that I spent 5 hours this morning dealing with the fact that my Mac wouldn't release 137 gigabytes of disk space. And it was hidden from me, and it turned out to be Time Machine local syncs or something. But it took me 5 hours to figure out even where that stuff was on disk.
You just got to use do, the du command.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's it for our podcast on operating systems.
One of the
I have a question for you, and I just cut off Mark, but I'm okay with that. So, what outside of ExVenture and Grapevine, what have you been looking at in the Elixir space, be it libraries or other projects that just interest you in the last few weeks?
Sure. Let me pull up a mix file and see what I pulled in. Let's see. So I think it's mostly been Prometheus, I think. Yeah. Yep. I did use a pretty cool app called Porcelain, which is a wrapper around using
ports.
Yeah, ports and...
Yeah, so Porcelain is an interesting...
Sorry.
I have used that before. It's a... I'm trying to find a link to it right now.
But yeah, it calls out to the system shell through a way that doesn't fork your process, I think, and is way better than whatever standard Erlang will do, to my knowledge. There's also a Go library that can wrap the outside of Porcelain. I forget what they called it, but I think it's something...
Goon.
Sorry?
It's called Goon.
Yeah.
I used Porcelain back in the day. I wrote a sort of a terminal pass-through via Phoenix channels, and I couldn't get it to work with the normal ports. I'm sure that someone could, but I fell over to Porcelain, and all of the things that were causing me grief stopped causing me grief, and it's been a lot of years, and I don't remember what those were.
Yeah. I specifically used Porcelain for image magic stuff. Because I didn't particularly like how I previously uploaded files to S3 and wanted to like hand do it to see if I could make it better. Don't know if I made it better, but it at least works.
That is one thing that's worth talking about, just with Elixir and development, that like with Python or Ruby, shelling out and running an external application or process is really simple. And I would say it's less simple with Elixir.
See, I feel differently. I feel like it felt like it was kind of going against the grain when I did it in Ruby specifically. Python, not at all. Mm-hmm. But Ruby specifically, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it was just a failing of mine, but it always felt awkward for me. And it feels like to me that the Erlang VM is just made to do it, because it is made to do it. Like, it's a very common thing to have these just long running processes that you talk to over a port. And so to me, I will say maybe the default shelling out behavior feels a little bit funky, but anything where you are interfacing with a long running process, because of the supervision, I suppose, I find that it's way more comfortable in Elixir to talk to other binaries that I've written.
And that is an excellent distinction, because there is like I just want to run like maybe even like a bash command, right? Just do an ls of something. But then when you have those long running processes, like say I have a situation where we're saying I want to run, we're migrating a Ruby application to an Elixir application, and there's some business logic that is still in Ruby. And what we've been able to do is actually just kind of wrap that up into some Ruby scripts and be able to kind of start up that, and using a port, we can just kind of talk to the application that way. And just
have you looked at BERT RPC?
What is that again?
BERT RPC, binary Erlang terms RPC. It's a thing from one of the founders of GitHub, and I've forgotten which one. But they clearly used Erlang a lot internally at GitHub early, and I assume they still do. And it is just a very simplistic way of doing RPC between different languages, either to each other, which it works very well for, or to an Erlang sort of orchestrator. And that has historically been what I did when I wanted to wrap up a Ruby script. And I recently did it with a Python script, and I think I even mentioned it a couple weeks ago, so oops.
No, that's cool. Can you kind of share a little bit more about how you might approach that?
Yeah, so I'm dropping a link into it now, although there is a more probably canonical link that Mark dropped. This is the Ruby client. But yeah, basically it makes it very trivial to offer yourself up as a service and then talk to that service from another language. And it's just very nice. Just runs a server. So what I use BERT for, not BERT RPC, but recently I have, we're mentioning shelling out. I have a need to read a lot of data from these PDF files. So we have like 50-page PDF files that we extract, I don't know, maybe 3 pages worth of data out of. No, probably more like 6 or 7. That doesn't matter. Anyway, but previously I was returning a very simplistic data structure from a Python script. Using Python to get data out of a PDF is way easier than anything I've found in Elixir. And so I was doing that, and I ultimately had to return more complicated data, and it suddenly justified bringing in BERT. And it took maybe an hour, and all of a sudden I could return something that I could trivially parse into a struct on the Elixir side once I got it back, and had sort of rich data, not just a list of, I was returning a CSV previously, and then I needed more data. And it just makes everything super, super nice when you want to do cross-language communication with a trivial encoding and decoding, especially if the host language you're looking for is Erlang.
That is really cool. It's a great resource. I'm going to have to look at that one, because I have not been using BERT RPC. So Eric, I know one of the other things that you guys at SmartLogic have been doing is you started a podcast.
Yeah, so we just started, it's the most clever name ever, but Smart Software with SmartLogic. We're doing a season-based approach to podcasts. So the first season is centered all around Elixir and production. We actually interviewed Mark here for one of the episodes, kind of talking about everything you do for your stuff at work. We also interviewed Frank Hunleth from Nerves to get a completely different take on Elixir and production.
Different kind of production, right?
Yeah, devices that are in places you may not be able to get to, and kind of figure out how to understand or how to secure them too as best as you can. And then there's a local company here, I think they're local, called Cluster Truck that does food stuff, and they have some stuff in Elixir we talk with Brooklyn Zelenka about her new company and the stuff that they're doing. Todd from Weed Maps, Todd Rustek.
Yeah, they presented at one of the Elixir conferences. Yeah,
Yep.
That's interesting. Just being aware of what their product is interesting.
Yep. Yeah, and all the we got to hear a story about how one April the 20th they went down and then decided that they had to figure out how to get off of Rails and onto something that was more performant, and ended up at Elixir, and every April the 20th after, they've been fine. So
really fine.
Yeah, and there's a few other guests. We'll kind of leave them as a reason to go subscribe and see what comes down the pipeline.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about? We've covered a number of different topics, kind of run the gamut.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just put another little plug before we finish up to go to my GitHub. You can find ExVenture, Grapevine. Grapevine actually does clustering now, as I mentioned, so you can see the weird approach I picked for that, which hopefully is good. But so you can see two different flavors of a clustered application. ExVenture does. Anyways, so yeah, they're all available. MIT, go check them out.
All right. Do we want to move on to picks?
Yes, let's go to picks. Josh, do you want to go?
Yes, I do. I really, really do this time, because I'm going to link you to a thing called Goma. And Goma, are you familiar with the Web Machine, which is is an Erlang library for building web applications that maps directly to the HTTP spec and is rather neat. So Goma is that, but for Gopher. So I figure we're talking about old school technology. I built a Gopher server once for fun using Goma in Elixir, and it was useless, but really fun. So we will not use this at work, just so it's clear. But it's really fun. So I just thought I'd link to it.
Yeah, it looks like the project has been mature and solid for at least the last 6 years.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was an April Fool's joke in the first place, but it works.
That's amazing.
And it was an excuse for me to read the Gopher spec, and I like to read specs generally, and yeah. So
I can recommend a spec for you. It's called Telnet. It's like 800 pages long. You'll never implement all of it, but someone has somewhere.
Or at least the feature that you haven't, and they will complain.
Yeah. Yep.
I started a project reading through RFCs from RFC1, and that was a lot of fun. But eventually I ran out of time, and it turns out that it wasn't benefiting me a whole lot, because there's a great one every 20. Anyway.
Yeah, and there's also I had stumbled across a RFC for Telnet some extension, and then found out that it's really easy to miss this was obsoleted by at the very top, and then you click, and then you click, and then you click, and then 12 RFCs later, you're finally at the one that's actually finished and was finished in 94.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Well, I was going to share one. This is kind of in the vein of talking about libraries and a lot of the different things, like both the ones that you're writing and open sourcing and other ones that we're referencing and using. There's one that was recently released by Plataforma Tech called Broadway. And this has been announced on their blog. And I just want to make people aware of this in case this is a thing that you actually would benefit from. So just kind of summarize from their announcement, they're saying Broadway was mainly designed to help developers build concurrent multi-stage data ingestion and data processing pipelines. It allows developers to consume data efficiently from different sources such as Amazon SQS, RabbitMQ, and others. So it is an interesting tool. Like if you're in that space where you're dealing with streaming in from queues, normally you would just use Gen Stage, but then you always had to handle these difficult kind of edge cases. And this library, it's like a 0.1 release. So it's very new, but it is one of those where it's like, hey, that might actually solve the problem for you, because they're kind of trying to standardize some of those problems that they solve. So Broadway is something to check out. And Eric, do you have something?
Yeah, so I will pick. I also help run a unconference called RestFest. We just announced dates for the Midwest RestFest in Grand Rapids at the end of May. So this is a tiny little unconference where everyone talks, everyone kind of collaborates together about any kind of web API that you so desire, GraphQL or REST or Hypermedia or whatever you want. So there's one in Grand Rapids, there's one in South Carolina, in Greenville. So if anyone's close to those, I definitely suggest you give it a look.
Awesome. Well, Eric, it was a pleasure talking with you again and getting an update on what ExVenture is doing and what you're up to. And if people would like to follow you online or connect with you, where would you like them to go?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at twitter.com/Eric Oestrich. There's an E after the O. The rest is like ostrich. Otherwise, there's links on exventure.org to find me in numerous places. There's, I think, a Discord that we have a few people learning Elixir in. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today, and we hope you'll join us next week with Elixir Mix.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.